Eleanor entered the Eastern Palace as a replacement bride, a pawn in a game of imperial survival. By day, she serves Crown Prince Alexander, the perfect disciplined heir. By night, she loses her heart to a ghost in a hidden glade, a man with the prince's face but a rebel's soul. One face, two fates, and a secret that bleeds through the silk. As the endgame nears, Eleanor must decide. Is she loving a man, a monster, or a lie? In this court, the deadliest move is falling for the wrong shadow. Eleanor Sue becoming the crown princess was a complete accident. Everyone in the Sue family had thought their quiet eldest daughter would marry a go-board. When her mother burst in, flustered and holding a wedding dress, Eleanor was still studying a Go manual, puzzling over a complex problem she had set for herself. She looked up to see her mother's distraught face. "Stella, that wretched girl, Stella, has run away." A clap of thunder roared outside. The wind rustled the lotus leaves as a midsummer downpour arrived without warning, instantly drenching the world. Stella was Eleanor's younger sister. Unlike her serene and placid older sibling, she was mischievous and whimsical, her eyes glinting with clever schemes. The Sue family was part of the nobility of the Eastern Empire, holding a hereditary marquisate and wielding significant influence. Eleanor and Stella were the two daughters of the Sue family. Stella had been betrothed to the crown prince and was set to become the crown princess, an object of envy for every woman in the capital. But right at the height of the bustling wedding preparations, Stella had vanished, leaving only a note behind. She had run off with a handsome guard from the Sue manor. The entire Sue manor was thrown into chaos. Amid the pandemonium, the Marquis and his wife thought of their eldest daughter. Gritting their teeth, they rushed to the palace to report to the emperor and try to salvage the situation. And so, in the pouring rain of that midsummer day, Eleanor put on the red wedding dress, clutched her beloved go-board, and entered the palace in a daze. In a single night, her destiny had been rewritten. To save face, the Sue family and the Eastern Palace reached an agreement. The official story was that the second daughter of the Sue family, Stella, had suddenly fallen gravely ill and tragically passed away. Her elder sister, Eleanor Sue, would enter the palace in her stead to marry the crown prince and assume the title of crown princess, ensuring a harmonious union. After a whirlwind of apologies and damage control, when the dust finally settled, Eleanor found herself in the bridal chamber. Red candles flickered. A single door separated her from the clamor outside, leaving her alone with the crown prince, Alexander Chen. The room was utterly still. Seated upright under her red veil, she could only hear the crown prince drinking, cup after cup, in a tense, suppressed silence. He truly was the master of the Eastern Palace, impeccably raised. Even in a situation like this, he managed to contain his anger. But Eleanor sighed. A tingle ran through her numb fingertips. The air crackled with unspoken tension, and an old saying came to mind. The wind rises before the coming storm. The crown prince and Stella had been childhood sweethearts, deeply in love. Everyone had assumed they would grow old together. A perfect couple. No one could have imagined that Stella's heart would change so abruptly. A sudden, tumultuous infatuation with a guard she had known for less than a month had given her the reckless courage to run to the ends of the earth. She left without a backward glance, offering only a few brief words of apology on a note to her Alex. Alexander Chen's grip tightened. With a surge of inner power, the wine cup shattered in his hand. On the bed, Eleanor flinched. His handsome face was already flushed with drink. He grabbed the wine pot and tilted his head back, gulping down the strong liquor. But it couldn't extinguish the fire in his heart. With a low growl, he flung his red robes aside and hurled the pot away. With a loud thud, Eleanor, who had secretly lifted her veil, was struck squarely on the head. Blood trickled down from her temple. She blinked, and a drop of blood slid past her eyelashes and into her mouth, tasting metallic and sweet. The wine instantly sobered Alexander Chen. He staggered forward and gripped Eleanor's shoulders, his voice hoarse. Are you all right, Crown Princess?" His voice trembled, and his face grew even paler. For in that moment, no one could have known that their flawless, godlike crown prince had a fatal weakness. He fainted at the sight of blood. And so, on her first night in the Eastern Palace, Eleanor was knocked onto the bed by a limp body, and the first words she spoke were, "The physician! Summon the physician!" The Crown Prince has fainted. News that Crown Prince Alexander Chen, mourning his deceased fiancée Stella, had collapsed from grief and drink in the bridal chamber quickly spread through the palace. The perfect lover who inhabited the dreams of so many was now shrouded in another layer of tragedy. Amidst the chorus of sympathy and sighs, the maids of the Eastern Palace would never know that their brilliant and formidable crown prince had fainted simply because of a little blood. This was a secret between him and his crown princess. Eleanor kept her lips sealed, and Alexander Chen was deeply grateful. But it added a layer of awkwardness. Ever since he had fainted in front of Eleanor on their wedding night, he felt stilted around her. Eleanor, for her part, was tactful enough to keep her gaze lowered and her focus absolute, never looking at him. She immersed herself solely in her Go board, studying all sorts of difficult game positions. The Su family used to say that Eleanor was the reincarnation of a Go spirit in human form. She loved the game as if it were her life. Since childhood, she had never been noisy or demanding, content to just sit with a Go board and study. As a young woman, with just a little guidance, she could utterly defeat her father, Marquis Su, who would readily admit defeat. Her own personality had been shaped by the ebb and flow of the game, growing more serene and tranquil with each passing day. When he was young, Alexander Chen often visited the Su manor. While the other children played together, Eleanor was always the quietest one. Compared to her lively and pretty younger sister, Stella, she seemed to lack a certain spark of life. Even when she put down her Go board to entertain guests as her father instructed, Alexander always saw that her mind was elsewhere. She never joined their games, preferring to sit by herself near the rockery, scratching on the ground with a stick and muttering to herself, "Horizontal position at the 3-9 point, remove at the 5-6 point." Alexander found it amusing and asked Stella about it. Stella just pouted. "Don't mind her. My sister is just weird." Over time, Alexander grew used to it. Besides, with Stella by his side, he had little time to pay any mind to Eleanor. He even thought that if you exiled Eleanor to a deserted island, as long as she had a Go board, she would be perfectly content. Though they had known each other since childhood, they had exchanged no more than a few dozen sentences, mostly polite formalities like "Greetings, Your Highness," and "A pleasure, Lady Eleanor." And now, this hopelessly dull woman had become his crown princess. Alexander could only marvel at how unpredictable life was, how fate toyed with people. And so they lived with a respectful distance between them for 2 months. Their relationship took a turn as autumn began. That evening, Alexander was escorting Eleanor to the Empress's palace to watch an opera. Halfway there, a servant hurried to his side and whispered that they had news of Stella. Alexander was overjoyed. With an excited flick of his sleeves, he turned back, hastily tossing out an excuse that something urgent had come up and telling Eleanor to go on without him. Eleanor just nodded, unconcerned. The next day, Alexander returned, dejected. The news had been false. He still hadn't found Stella. He sighed, and even after finishing his meal, he hadn't recovered. Then, something unexpected happened. Eleanor came to him with her Go set. In a startling break from her usual reserve, she eagerly took his arm, wanting to play a game with him. "Come on, let's play. We have to set the rules beforehand this time, so you don't cheat later." Such a lively, animated expression. She no longer called him "Your Highness" with deference, but spoke with a warm familiarity. It was like a drop of ink spreading on paper, bringing a vibrant quality to her usually placid face. She radiated the serene beauty of a landscape painting come to life. She looked like a completely different person. Alexander was stunned and stood there for a long moment before he came to his senses. Eleanor had already set up the board and picked up a white stone, waiting for him with a smile. Without thinking, Alexander quickly straightened his clothes, picked up a black stone, and made a courteous gesture. "After you." During that game of back and forth, something quietly shifted. Alexander found himself glancing at Eleanor several times, his heart pounding unusually fast. He didn't know where the feeling was coming from. What he didn't know was that the night before, after he had left, Eleanor had been walking when a Go problem suddenly came to mind. She sent her maid back to her room to fetch a manual, while she herself wandered through the night, muttering to herself. She wandered and wandered until she became lost in the vast imperial palace. She had stumbled upon the back mountain and, in a bamboo grove there, discovered a sea of flowers, a small courtyard, and a person, a man who looked exactly like Alexander Chen. He wore a moon-white ribbon in his hair, was dressed in a dark robe, and sat barefoot on the roof, reciting poetry to the moon and drinking wine. Only when Eleanor got closer did she see him clearly and cry out in shock, "Your Highness?" The man turned his head. His face, bathed in the moonlight, was like that of an immortal descended from the heavens. His first reaction upon seeing Eleanor was astonishment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he tightened his grip on the folding fan in his hand, relaxed his brow, and smiled, the corners of his lips turning up slightly. "It's you?" Eleanor was in disbelief. This is your urgent business, Your Highness." That night, Eleanor saw a side of Alexander Chen she had never seen before. Gone was his usual calm and steady demeanor. In its place was a spirit that was quick-witted, lively, free-spirited, and cunning. Yes, cunning. He invited her to a game of Go, as if he knew her skills intimately, and claimed he had a way to break her undefeated streak. Her interest was piqued. She asked him how. He raised an eyebrow smugly and said that if she followed his rules, she was guaranteed to lose. She asked what his rule was. He didn't answer, only saying she would find out in due time. With an air of mystery, his long, slender fingers had already picked up a black stone and made the first move. Under the stars, she played cautiously, responding with a clear mind. She played a flawless game. When her white stones had completely surrounded the black ones, poised to conquer the board, the Alexander Chen sitting across from her finally spoke. His beautiful eyes sparkled like the stars in the sky. He gave her a sly smile and said, letting the words drift on the wind, "My rule is simple, the colors are swapped, so when white wins, I win, you lose." Alexander Chen told Eleanor that this was their secret. He said that as the crown prince, the master of the Eastern Palace, his responsibilities were immense. He had too much to bear, and only by occasionally returning to this small flower garden could he relieve his stress and be himself. Eleanor understood and promised Alexander she would never speak of the garden to anyone. But then, as if remembering something, she looked up and asked, "Just like keeping your secret about fainting at the sight of blood?" Alexander stared at her for a moment, then burst out laughing. Of course. And so, Eleanor began to meet Alexander in the bamboo grove from time to time. They played Go under the moon, with the sky as their roof and the plants as their companions, happy and carefree. But when Eleanor returned to the Eastern Palace, she had to be the crown princess again. And the Alexander in the palace was not as unrestrained as the one in the mountains. He would revert to the flawless crown prince everyone saw. It seemed like nothing had changed, but Eleanor knew that some things were different. Their relationship had progressed by leaps and bounds. They were no longer the respectfully distant couple they had been. The palace Alexander would take her horse racing and to watch the sunset. In front of the Empress, he would gently put his arm around her waist and say that all was well, that he and his wife were deeply devoted, and his mother needn't worry. Alexander did these things naturally now, no longer the perfunctory performance he once put on for outsiders. The way he looked at Eleanor was different. Since that last game of Go, he had discovered that his Go-obsessed crown princess had a vibrant side he had never noticed before. Her every smile and frown was so vivid that he couldn't help himself. He couldn't help but want to understand her world, and the more he learned, the more delighted he became. He felt like he was getting to know the quiet, Go-obsessed woman all over again. And Eleanor, nestled in Alexander's arms, would smile faintly, feeling just as happy. Although she preferred the Alexander of the mountains. Perhaps in the mountains, Alexander completely let his guard down, and his personality became more uninhibited, a stark contrast to his steady and serious demeanor in the Eastern Palace. He would take her to catch fireflies, to catch fish in the stream, to sing on the roof, and during their games under the moon, he would cunningly invent all sorts of ridiculous rules. When he could no longer trick Eleanor, he would shamelessly take back his moves with a roguish grin. Again. This round doesn't count." Eleanor was both exasperated and amused. During the day, when she played Go with the Alexander of the Eastern Palace, she would think of his moonlit cheating and feel a rare, girlish impulse. She would deliberately make a wrong move, then mimic his roguishness, blinking her eyes and laughingly demanding a do-over. Again, this round doesn't count. But the Alexander in the Eastern Palace was utterly astonished. He stared at Eleanor with wide eyes. The Crown Princess would also. Eleanor's smile froze. She didn't know how to respond. She had forgotten this was the Eastern Palace. The Alexander before her wouldn't joke with her like that. Even if they were the same person, as soon as he returned to the palace, the Alexander she loved from the night seemed to hide away, concealed beneath a flawless mask. In public, he was always just the gentle and courteous crown prince. She had once accidentally mentioned the bamboo grove to the Alexander in the Eastern Palace, but he had shown no reaction. She had assumed he was feigning ignorance to prevent their secret from getting out, thinking him cautious, and gave it no more thought. But at this moment, Eleanor felt a pang of disappointment. Faced with Alexander's astonished expression, she couldn't tell if he was genuinely acting or just trying to prevent outsiders from seeing any cracks in his facade. The unrestrained man in the mountains, the self-possessed man in the palace. One would laughingly take her to catch fireflies and fish under the moon, the other would gently embrace her on horseback as they watched the sunset. The same face, but different words and actions. Which one was his true self? Eleanor sighed. She had lost her enthusiasm for the game. All she wanted now was to be under the moon in the bamboo grove, looking at the roguish smile on the face of the Alexander in white. Although she had promised the man in the mountains she would never speak of the garden to anyone, being so careful all the time, unable to be her true self, and having to cover up even a simple joke, left her feeling utterly dejected. The game ended on a rather sour note. Eleanor said she was tired. Crown Prince Alexander Chen watched her curtsy and leave, the black stone in his hand still hovering over the board. He didn't understand, but he had a faint feeling that something was wrong. Gazing at Eleanor's retreating figure, he narrowed his eyes, lost in thought. The days trickled by like this. Eleanor learned to interact with the different versions of Alexander. Even when doubts arose, she told herself that, no matter what, it was still him. Although her happiest moments were in the mountains, until Alexander's birthday. The city was filled with fireworks, and a grand banquet was held in the palace. The clinking of glasses and lively chatter filled the air. Suddenly, disaster struck. A group of female dancers performing in the hall abruptly drew flexible swords from their sleeves and lunged straight for Alexander Chen. "Assassins!" Screams erupted. In the chaos, Eleanor swiftly moved to block a sword meant for Alexander. Blood splattered everywhere. Amid the confusion, a blade grazed Alexander's hand, drawing beads of blood. He kicked over a table, forced the assassins back with a few palm strikes, and pulled Eleanor into a swift retreat behind the circle of guards. Eleanor's face was pale, and she trembled in Alexander's arms. But she still remembered to cover his eyes, shielding him from the sight of blood. Don't look, don't be afraid, I'm here, I'm by your side." Hearing her faint, weak voice, Alexander's eyes stung, and a warmth flooded his heart. He couldn't help but hold her tighter. After being captured, the assassins all bit their tongues and committed suicide, leaving no clues. But Alexander and the Empress both knew who had sent these people to kill the crown prince. It could only be the sixth prince, Julian Chen. He and his mother, imperial consort Celine, were ambitious. They had been openly and secretly fighting with the Eastern Palace for decades, exhausting all efforts to topple Crown Prince Alexander Chen and seize the dragon throne they coveted. The emperor's health was visibly deteriorating day by day. If they didn't act soon, it might be too late. Their desperation had grown, their moves becoming more frequent and reckless. This assassination attempt on the Crown Prince's birthday had been long planned, but it had still failed. They had never imagined that Alexander and the Empress were already on guard, having made thorough preparations, just waiting for them to walk into the trap. Fortunately, the assassins were loyal and did not expose them. Alexander handled all of these matters, only giving Eleanor a simple summary of the turmoil. Once he assured her of his safety, she felt at ease and focused on recovering from her injury. By the time a marked bamboo leaf appeared on her windowsill again, half a month had passed. This was the secret signal Eleanor and the mountain Alexander had agreed upon. Whenever she saw this leaf, Eleanor would sneak off to the flower garden, where he would be waiting for her to enjoy tea, play Go, and savor the carefree moments in the mountains. The leaf always appeared shortly after the palace Alexander left on an errand. This time, he had gone to the Court of Judicial Review overnight to examine the assassin's autopsy reports for clues. Eleanor assumed this was still Alexander's way of misleading others and keeping their secret safe. She felt a strange sense of joy, a joy for the little secret between them. But this time, it was clear the heavens were not on their side. As Eleanor, holding a lantern, quietly stepped into the bamboo grove, an autumn rain began to fall unexpectedly. Alexander pulled her into the house to take shelter. They looked at each other, both soaked to the bone, and broke into wide smiles. As they laughed, Eleanor's face began to flush. A charged silence fell between them in the small room. Alexander breathed softly, as if afraid to break the dreamlike scene. He moved closer to Eleanor, inch by inch, as if about to embrace her. Eleanor's heart pounded like a drum. Her eyes met Alexander's, a feeling she had never experienced with him in the Eastern Palace. But just as they were about to embrace, a bolt of lightning streaked across the night sky. The figure in the moon-white robe suddenly sobered up. Before he could retreat, Eleanor's expression changed drastically, and she shoved him away. "Oh, who are you?" Outside the window, lightning flashed and thunder roared, carrying a biting chill. A cold wind swept into the room, seeping into their bones. Eleanor stared at his long, slender hands, her lips trembling as she shook her head. "You're not Alexander Chen. You're not the crown prince. Who are you?" Alexander's hand should have been grazed by a sword not long ago, leaving a faint scar. But the hands before her were perfectly clean, as pale as jade, without a single mark. I am." The man's hands trembled slightly as his identity was exposed. But there was no panic in his eyes, only a deep confusion. It wasn't until another clap of thunder sounded that he flinched, then looked sharply at Eleanor, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I am a dead-leaf butterfly that no one wants. I am a pitiful wretch, abandoned by this world. I am a useless piece on the board that should never have existed." Stella was back. She returned covered in scars, her heart in pieces. The guard she had run away with had grown tired of life on the run and of catering to her volatile temper. The initial spark of passion had long since been ground down by the harsh realities of their existence. Finally, after one last fight, the guard knocked her unconscious, sold her to a brothel for travel money, and vanished. Stella barely escaped the brothel with her life. After enduring countless hardships, she made her way back to the capital as a gaunt and filthy beggar. She collapsed in front of Sue Manor. When she woke and learned that her sister Eleanor had taken her place and married into the Eastern Palace, becoming the crown princess, she was overcome by a fit of laughing and crying, directing all her venomous hatred at Eleanor. When Eleanor and Alexander rushed to Sue Manor, Stella smashed a vase. With her hair in a wild mess, she threw a tantrum like a bitter, abandoned wife, possessing none of her old, mischievous charm. "What right do you have to steal Alex from me? What right do you have to be the crown princess instead of me? You aren't as good as me in any way. Why is your life better than mine?" Stella shrieked, her long nails bared. She lunged wildly at Eleanor, her eyes full of venom, intent on clawing her sister's face. But Alexander caught Stella's hand and flung it aside. At the end of his patience, he roared, "This is all your own doing. What right do you have to blame Eleanor? If she hadn't taken your place in the palace to save face for both the Sue family and the Eastern Palace, your entire family would have been punished for your actions. You think only of yourself. You're so selfish, so unrepentant. It's truly disheartening." Long after Alexander had pulled Eleanor away, the sound of Stella's heart-wrenching curses could still be heard echoing from her locked room. "Eleanor Sue, I curse you. I curse you to never find the one you truly love." The malicious words drifted into Eleanor's ears, sending a chill down her spine. She didn't dare meet the concern in Alexander's eyes. Never find the one she truly loved. Perhaps her sister's words were a prophecy. The Alexander from the mountains had refused to tell her his true identity. He only said that if she wanted to find him for a game of chess in the future, she could call him Cole. After she returned from the mountains, she fell into a serious illness and spent 2 whole months recovering in the palace, seeing no one. She didn't know if the sickness was in her body or her heart, or what exactly she was trying to escape. Alexander cared for her tirelessly, his attention unwavering. But she knew it was all wrong. It had all been wrong from the very beginning. Everything on the mountain felt like a fleeting dream. The bamboo forest, the moonlight, the scent of flowers, and him, just across the chessboard. He looked identical to Alexander, but his personality was a world apart. He would cheat at chess, drink freely under the moon, and take her to the stream to catch fish. He would pull her onto the roof and sing with wild abandon, like an immortal bathed in moonlight. There were too many memories, too many moments that made her heart race. The secret joy she felt gazing at his profile by moonlight was something the prince in the Eastern Palace could never give her. Whether it was deception or merely a dream, she couldn't forget him, couldn't let him go. As the Buddhist scriptures say, she could not escape the pain of separation, the suffering of being unable to let go. As the first snow of the new year began to fall, a bamboo leaf drifted through a window of the Eastern Palace. Eleanor picked it up and gazed at it for a long time, her eyes filling with tears. That night, Alexander was out meeting with General Mo to discuss important matters. After he left, Eleanor gathered her courage, took a lantern, and quietly slipped into the bamboo forest on the back mountain. The young man was still there, waiting on the roof, as if he had been guarding that spot for years. The moonlight fell upon him, and the sea of flowers below was just as it had been, completely unchanged. Bare feet, dark hair, white snow. It was just like the first time she saw him, pure, beautiful, and utterly pristine. He seemed to sense her presence. He turned, and his eyes met hers. In that shared gaze, time seemed to stand still. Through the wind and snow, Eleanor thought she could hear the sound of a single flower blooming. Cole. My name is Cole. My name comes from wither, as in the phrase to wither and flourish with the seasons. Eleanor. My name is Eleanor. My name comes from flourish, as in to wither and flourish with the seasons. They mimicked each other's introductions, staring at one another until they couldn't hold back their laughter. The ice between them melted. Though they reunited under the moon like old friends, they reintroduced themselves, treating it as a fresh start. She told him he was never to lie to her again. She liked playing chess with him, catching fish with him, and just being with him. She didn't know who he was, but if he said his name was Cole, she would believe him without question. She couldn't deny her own heart. Even if it was just a fleeting dream, she was willing to risk everything to seize this one transient joy. And so, they began to meet in the bamboo forest, playing chess under the moon. Amid the turmoil of war and the chaos of power struggles raging outside, the rest of the world faded away. With eyes only for each other, they spent the most unforgettable time of their lives in that sea of flowers. Still, as the crown princess, Eleanor dared not cross any lines. Their feelings for each other ran deep, but they always maintained propriety, and she held fast to her principles. She planned to wait until Alexander had finished his important business. Then she would confess everything and ask him to grant her a divorce. Alexander was an excellent man. He would surely find another woman who was his equal, one whom he could truly love. As for her, she hadn't been so fortunate. All she had to offer was a heart full of apologies. But before Eleanor found the right moment to speak, the unexpected happened. The following spring, the emperor fell gravely ill. It was the most critical moment in the power struggle between the crown prince's faction and that of the sixth prince. Tensions were high, ready to explode at any moment. Just then, an envoy from the Western Palace arrived for a visit. The envoy was a chess enthusiast, so the Eastern Empire's Ministry of Rights catered to his preference by organizing a grand chess tournament in the capital. The finalist would have the honor of playing against the envoy to promote friendly relations between the two nations. It was a perfect opportunity. Both the Crown Prince's faction and the Sixth Prince's faction were desperate to win the support of the Western Palace. The Crown Prince visited the envoy at the guest house that night to sound him out. The envoy wasn't interested in anything but chess. An avid player his whole life, the envoy had never lost a game. He declared that if anyone could earn his respect by beating him just once, he would grant that person a private conversation. The true meaning of that conversation went without saying. When Alexander returned, he was overjoyed. He pulled Eleanor into an embrace. If Eleanor could win the tournament and defeat the envoy, securing his support, Alexander was confident he could crush the sixth prince's faction once and for all and ascend the throne. And Eleanor would become the empress. Eleanor listened to Alexander's plan in a daze, her heart in turmoil. She wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. She couldn't bring herself to distract him at such a critical time. She decided that after the tournament, after she had won him the support of the Western Palace, she would confess everything and leave, hoping to live a quiet life with Cole in the mountains. Lost in her thoughts, Eleanor didn't notice Alexander glance out the window as he spoke. Something flickered in his eyes, a deep, bottomless darkness. The night before the tournament, Eleanor went to the bamboo forest. She told Cole to wait for her, promising that once she had settled things, she would come back to him and never leave again. Cole gazed at her, his heart surging with so much emotion he couldn't speak. He could only hold her tightly, resting his chin on her head and murmur, "I'll wait for you. I'll wait for you to come back." And so he waited. For half a month. In the chess tournament, Eleanor swept through her opponents one after another. As expected, she reached the finals without trouble, eliminating every master the sixth prince sent to stop her. At last, she sat down to face the envoy from the Western Palace. The final match was a public spectacle, held on a grand stage in the capital that drew countless onlookers. Soon, the crown prince's name spread throughout the Eastern Empire, winning the hearts of the people. Alexander had achieved his goal and crushed the sixth prince's morale. He was immensely pleased with himself. Eleanor was happy too. Before the tournament, Alexander had promised her one wish, swearing he would grant any request she made once his goal was accomplished. As she placed the final piece on the board, Eleanor suppressed the excitement in her heart. She rose and bowed to the envoy, humble yet confident, calm and composed. "Thank you for the game," she said softly. At her quiet words, the entire crowd fell silent for a moment. The next second, the capital erupted in cheers. Amid the celebration, Eleanor breathed a sigh of relief. Her eyes met Alexander's across the distance, and she couldn't help but smile, her eyes curving into crescents. But when it was all over and she rushed to the back mountain, her smile vanished. The sea of flowers on the mountain had completely withered. The ground was scorched, as if a great fire had just swept through. Only a single, dilapidated bamboo house remained. She stumbled forward in a panic, crying out, "Cole! Hey!" When Eleanor stepped into the bamboo house, she finally saw Cole. No, it was Alexander. Dressed in his fine robes, he sat at the table, sipping tea, as serene as ever. He looked up at the trembling Eleanor and smiled. "Stop looking. There is no more Cole. He and I were one and the same. To be precise, he was another personality. One that awakened inside me in the dead of night. Didn't you notice? He and I never appeared at the same time. During the day, it was me. At night, it was him. As a child, I witnessed the endless struggles within the palace. My mother constantly drilled into me the duties of a crown prince. Under all that pressure and restraint, one dark night, the personality of Cole was born. He was the embodiment of all my repressed pain, my secret longing for a different life. He would emerge occasionally, but I was always in control. But that changed after you appeared. He started fighting me for control, even trying to possess my body for himself. We argued. We each had our own plans, but he was no match for me. He was, in the end, just a mental phantom, born from the terror and anxiety I felt about the future as a child. Now the outcome is decided. There is no more terror in my heart, no more anxiety. Only the joy of victory. So he's dead. He died the moment you won that game and utterly defeated the sixth prince's faction. In the 37th year of the Chenghua era, Emperor Yun passed away. Crown Prince Alexander Chen ascended the throne. He swiftly eliminated the sixth prince and his followers, bringing peace to the land and unifying the empire. He changed the reign title to Yongchang and took the imperial name Wen. The man who had been by her side was now Emperor Wen, and Eleanor became the Empress of the Eastern Empire, mother to the nation. Despite the many honors bestowed upon her and the protection granted to her family, Eleanor fell gravely ill, as if her soul had left her body. The day Alexander laid everything bare, she had been struck as if by lightning. She refused to believe it. She grabbed his hands, demanding, "Then what about the scar? How do you explain the scar on Cole's hand?" As if expecting this, Alexander sighed. He took a small box from his robes and removed a thin, skin-like film. He pressed it gently onto the back of his hand. In an instant, a faint scar appeared, the very same scar she remembered on Cole's hand. He was desperate to separate himself from me. He always wanted to be different, to prove he was his own person. As he spoke in that calm, unhurried voice, Eleanor finally let out a wretched cry and collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. So, that was the truth of it. No wonder he would never tell her his real identity. No wonder his personality was so different from Alexander's. No wonder he only appeared after Alexander had left. No wonder she'd only ever seen him at dusk and at night. All along, they had been the same person. The one she had fallen in love with was nothing but a phantom, a fleeting specter born from her own husband's childhood trauma. And she was the one who had made that phantom vanish from the world. The truth was revealed. But the revelation shattered Eleanor, and she fell gravely ill. Only with Alexander's meticulous care did she slowly recover. Over the next few years, she often returned to the bamboo forest on the back mountain. She replanted the sea of flowers that Alexander had burned and rebuilt the bamboo house. Everything could be made new again, but the person she longed for would never return. Countless times, Eleanor tried to convince herself that the man she loved was Emperor Wen, was Alexander Chen. They were the same person. She shouldn't be lost in such foolish thoughts. But whenever she played chess with Emperor Wen, she would lose herself in memories of a game under the stars, when a certain someone had playfully cheated. Eleanor performed her duties to Alexander and the empire perfectly. She was a virtuous and wise empress with a high reputation among the people. She was worthy of the title. But only she knew that she was not a good wife. She would even wake in the middle of the night, propping herself up to lean close to Alexander's ear and whisper softly, "Cole, Kane." How she wished he would come back, just for a moment, to open his eyes and give her that roguish smile, to pull her by the hand onto the roof, to sing to the moon, to be with her in their sea of flowers, carefree and secluded from the world. But then Alexander would pull her into his arms, and she would snap back to reality, knowing that nothing could ever be undone. Night after night, she was forced to face the reality that she had killed the man she loved most with her own hands. Day and night she could touch his face, his body, but she could never again touch the soul she loved, hidden deep inside. Her Cole was long dead. On the last night of autumn, curled in Alexander's arms, Eleanor finally broke down. She cried her heart out, at last accepting the cruel fact that the man she loved was gone for good. That year, Eleanor was 27. The days ahead stretched long before her, but she felt as if her life was already over. She smashed her beloved chessboard. Watching the black and white pieces scatter across the floor, she vowed never to touch the game again. For it was her victory in that game that had killed him. She loved chess, but she had loved him more. The years passed in a blur. Eleanor Sue gave Alexander Chen 2 princesses and a prince. Though she felt no romantic love for him, their years together had forged a deep, familial bond. Over time, she often visited Stella. Stella's mind had begun to fray, but her hostility towards Eleanor gradually faded. They were sisters, after all. When Stella's mind finally broke under the strain and she took her own life, Eleanor rushed to Sioux Manor to see her one last time. On her deathbed, Eleanor held Stella's hand, tears streaming down her face. They spoke softly, reminiscing about their childhood just as they had in their youth. With a pale smile, Stella weakly implored her, "Sister, take care of Alex. He has suffered a great deal too." After Stella's funeral, Eleanor, to Alexander Chen's surprise, brought out a Go board and invited him to the bamboo house on the back mountain for one more game. Alexander Chen hadn't played Go with Eleanor in many years. He was overjoyed by the invitation, thinking she had finally let go of the past and the obsessions that had haunted her. Beneath the moon and stars, they sat across from each other. A gentle breeze whispered through the flowers. the same sea of flowers, the same bamboo house. But after all these years, the feelings between them were completely different. Eleanor picked up a white stone and said lightly, "Before Stella died, she was still thinking of you. She asked me to take good care of you, to ensure you would be happy and without a worry in the world." Alexander Chen fell silent at her words, then sighed, a wave of emotion washing over him. But Eleanor continued, "She also said that you have suffered a great deal. That as a child, your position as crown prince was coveted by others, so you could never relax for a moment. And that you had to endure the cruel fact of losing your twin brother." Her voice was soft and cool, but each word struck him like a hammer blow. Alexander Chen snapped his head up, his face turning deathly pale. The wind swept across the mountain, a killing chill in the air. Eleanor continued placing her stones, her expression unchanged. Without a glance at Alexander Chen, she calmly narrated, revealing, bit by bit, the truth that had been buried for so many years beneath the moonlight. The Eastern Empire's imperial family had an unwritten rule of succession. If a consort gave birth to twins, neither could become the heir. This was to avoid the confusion and potential for strife that could arise from their identical faces should one ascend the throne. So, when the Empress gave birth to twin boys on a stormy night decades ago, she was driven to despair. At the time, imperial consort Selene was 5 months pregnant, and the rivalry between her and the Empress was intense. The Empress had thought that giving birth to an imperial heir first would be a decisive victory. She had never imagined she would have twins. According to the Eastern Empire's rules, her 2 children had lost their claim to the throne the moment they were born. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the Empress held her 2 babies, weeping with bitter resentment. She had planned for everything but this. If imperial consort Selene gave birth to a son, he would be named crown prince, and it would be too late. At her wit's end, the Empress exchanged a look with her trusted confidant. Steeling her heart, she tearfully covered her younger son's mouth and nose, holding her hand there until the small body struggled and then went still. His body was buried in a bamboo grove on the palace's back mountain. The Empress couldn't bear the thought of her child being cast away, far from her. She ordered a sea of flowers planted over his grave and a bamboo house built nearby, a small comfort for her grief and guilt. And so, the joyous news spread. The Empress had given birth to a son. The Emperor was delighted. He named the child Alexander and made him the crown prince, doting on him. Imperial consort Selene, 1 step too late, was overshadowed by the Empress for the rest of her life. Amidst the celebratory fireworks that lit up the palace, no one knew that another small life had once been here, had let out his first cry in his mother's arms, only to be silenced forever by her own hand. With Crown Prince Alexander Chen, the Empress's position was secure. Yet she could never forget her younger son, the one she had sacrificed. She secretly named him Aiden, and had someone burn paper offerings with his birth date and time at his grave on the back mountain. Alexander Chen, Aiden Chen. Twin brothers whose fates diverged at the moment of their birth. One became the adored crown prince, the other, a wandering phantom on the mountain. Yes, a phantom. Aiden Chen was not completely dead when he was buried. A faint breath of life remained in him. As the moonlight washed over the land, he absorbed the spiritual energy of the heavens and the earth. Fueled by the resentment of his unjust death, he became a phantom. Not quite dead, but not truly alive, half human and half ghost. His soul was bound to the sea of flowers. Unable to pass on to the next life, he could only roam the mountain, a lonely guardian of the bamboo house. Watching the stars turn as he grew into manhood and solitude, he was filled with hate. They were twins, yet his brother Alexander was the exalted crown prince, while he was a lonely ghost, abandoned by his own family. So on the night of Alexander's wedding, Aiden drifted outside the window, intending to snatch away his brother's new bride and give him a fright. But before Aiden could act, Alexander casually threw a wine pot, striking the forehead of the unfortunate crown princess, the substitute bride who had been sent to the palace. After that absurd night, Aiden found himself watching Alexander's crown princess, the young lady from the Su family who was obsessed with Go, Eleanor Su. Aiden also loved Go. Life on the mountain was lonely, Occasionally, a fox spirit or a rabbit demon would play a game or chat with him, but most of the time, he drank alone, talked to himself, and played Go against himself to pass the long hours. The night Eleanor stumbled into the bamboo grove on the back mountain, he was sitting on the roof. When he turned and saw her, he was filled with an indescribable joy. He played Go with her, talked with her, and did all the things with her that he used to do alone. His withered existence suddenly burst into color. Unwittingly, he fell in love with Eleanor, the woman who had brought him so much happiness. But he was afraid. Afraid that if Eleanor knew the truth, she would see him as a monster. So, he lied to her. And when he could lie no longer, he told her his name was Cole. He explained that the name held his past within it, a trace of his real name, Aiden, and the withered sorrow of his long, lonely existence. Aiden Chen, or Cole, had waited with all his heart for Eleanor to return from the Go tournament that year. But instead, he was burned to death in the Sea of Flowers by a Taoist priest hired by his brother, Alexander Chen. Not even his bones remained. He was reduced to ash and smoke. Alexander had discovered their affair. Ever the meticulous crown prince, he had remained outwardly calm. While Eleanor was away at the tournament, he hired a priest to kill his own brother, the brother who should never have existed in the first place. Alexander then concocted a story about having a dual personality to deceive Eleanor, and his deceit lasted for more than a decade. He had thought that time was on his side, that he could eventually make her forget Aiden and fall in love with him. But in reality, he was only deceiving himself. What he could never have predicted was that a secret he had confided in Stella in their youth would be revealed to Eleanor on Stella's deathbed. That one clue allowed Eleanor to investigate until she had pieced together the entire truth. Heaven is indeed fair. What is yours is yours. What is not, no matter how desperately you seize it, will be lost in the end. When the Empress died, the nation mourned. Dressed in white, Alexander Chen had looked at Eleanor and seen that she was embarking on her own final journey. He knew then that he would never be able to forget her. That night, as she laid out the truth she had uncovered, blood began to trickle from the corner of her mouth. He stared in horror, only then realizing that she had coated the white ghost stones, her own pieces, with poison. With every piece she placed, the poison had seeped into her body, a slow, irreversible process that would finally grant her release. She told him she had originally intended to poison the black stones as well, but in the end, she couldn't bring herself to do it. He was the father of her children, the emperor of the Eastern Empire, the hope of all its people. And she cared for him, too, with the affection born from their long years together as family. But the only one she had ever truly loved was her Cole, her poor Aiden Chen. The wind lifted her long hair. She looked up at the night sky, a smile on her lips as her gaze slowly lost its focus. She had played so many games of Go in her life, but in the end, through all the turmoil, when she closed her eyes, there was only one she remembered. It was a game under the stars, where the black stones were surrounded by the white. Just as she was about to win, the player holding the black stones gave her a cunning smile. My rule is that the colors are reversed, so if the white stones win, I win. You lose.